Welcome to this episode of Criminology Chats. I'm your host, J.R. Rainbolt. Today we will talk about the case of Jess Barola. And I'm very happy to have with me today one of our students from the Chicago School. Great student, Grace Farrell, and she has been on other episodes with me. And welcome to the show, Grace.
Thanks, Jar. It's been a little while since I've been on this, but I'm excited to do this one with you today.
Yeah, I know. You've been too busy. You work too
I know,
much.
school.
I know. Tell your professors to back off a little,
I know. Well, tell them to stop assigning, 12-page papers every week.
Oh my gosh, that's a lot.
I know.
Okay. We got to do some things up front here. This episode contains explicit content such as physical violence, domestic abuse, rape, child sexual abuse, as well as other explicit comments that may not be suitable for all audiences. So listener discretion is advised.
This podcast episode is for informational purposes only and does not constitute psychological, medical, legal, or professional advice. The speakers in this episode are not psychological or legal professionals, and the opinions and comments by them are solely for entertainment purposes. Items discussed in this episode include information provided in emails by an incarcerated individual and has not been verified through research, and the speakers are commenting on what is reflected in those emails.
Yes, and give a little bit of background for our listeners. We have been communicating with this particular inmate. She prefers to be called Jess, and currently she is doing life without the possibility of parole. And she wanted to correspond with us once I contacted her to provide information in hopes that it would help some of our students and help young people in general not follow in her footsteps. So, again, this is going to be us commenting on things that she is telling us in correspondence. We had approximately 11 or 12 written correspondence between us over a period of a couple of months. And that is where most of this information is coming from. Criminology research has supported the likelihood that childhood sexual and physical abuse or traumas combined with other childhood factors can result in later adulthood violence. And as you'll see as we go through this episode, there's going to be a lot of that with regards to Jess.
She did want us to know that by telling her story, she could possibly help someone through the pain that she had endured herself. So we wanted to ask more about Jess's childhood. Her mother gave birth to her at 16 years old, and she stated that her mom was her best friend and they grew up together. Her dad, on the other hand, only showed up when her stepdad wanted her gone and out of the house or when she couldn't deal with the abuse at home anymore. Her biological father was never really present, and if he was, he didn't handle emotions very well and was very detached. When she did stay with her dad, she was living in either Greeley, Colorado, Gilcrest, Colorado, LaSalle, Colorado, or San Antonio, Texas. But this was when she was younger. According to Jess, she grew up mostly in the canyons, which is an hour outside of Trinidad, Colorado, with her mom. However, she did tell us at one point they did live in Chicago and Virginia for a little bit. Jess also relayed that she never really had a solid home base except for her grandparents' farm in Platteville, Colorado, which her grandfather does still live there.
And I know that she didn't have a lot of adult supervision at home, not a lot of caring there and everything when it comes to her upbringing. And as you'll see
Mhm.
as we go through here, that's going to have a little bit of an impact, probably impact on her. When she was young, she loved math, science, and social studies, history. She was a mathlete and in science club and all the nerdy study groups. Better than me because I wasn't really in any of those. Her hobbies were outdoors, mostly fishing, hiking, camping, and anything in between. And in Colorado, that's very common. People love the outdoors out here and love to do anything outdoors. She loved to cook for her family using an open grill or open fire, she called it, and she would be content doing that. She loved music, a variety of music. She has a large family. Her father's side of the family, she has four half brothers, a bunch of cousins, second cousin, aunts, uncles, kind of like a normal Hispanic family on her father's side with the family dynamics that go with that. She told us that she was the weird white kid that did not speak any Spanish, like everyone else on her father's side of the family, that they felt sorry for her because she had to live with her mother and they knew her mother was kind of a mess. Jess said she never really fit in with her father's side of the family due to not speaking Spanish and looking more white than Hispanic. Jess said her father gave more of his attention to his sons than to her when she lived with him. Jess told us that her father believed in spankings, but not to the extreme. So she never said that he did anything there to cause her any type of trauma. When she lived with her father, she was sexually molested, though, by an uncle, her father's brother-in-law. He didn't speak English, and she was 9 years old at the time. She remembered an incident with her uncle when he was at home while his wife was in the hospital giving birth to one of their children. She and a cousin were lying on the floor, and the uncle started rubbing his feet on them and sat down next to them and started rubbing their thighs and back until he touched their butt. Her cousin, she said, was touched the same as she was on that incident by her uncle. And she said something else that caught my attention, and I quote, "All of us kids were touched by this uncle." But she said they never talked to one another about it. They never reported it. And she went on to say that her stepfather also molested her and a family friend when she was living with her father.
Yeah, it's quite unfortunate. She didn't have a very good family life on either side with her mom and her dad.
No.
The viewers will be able to hear that, especially on her mom's side and with past relationships, that it's a very common theme.
We're going to take a 60-second break to tell you about a great podcast coming out of Nashville, Tennessee.
Around age 10, Jess was raped for the first time. She told her mother that she was being molested by her own stepfather, but her mom did not believe her. Her stepfather would do other things like beating her mom, and Jess did witness these beatings on multiple occasions. Her mother did fear him, and her stepfather would beat all of the kids, but she didn't elaborate any further on this topic. Later in life, once Jess was an adult, her mother finally told her that she believed her about being molested by her stepfather. And she apologized to Jess for allowing it to happen for so long. And when Jess was about 12 years old and in school, she was a very high achieving student and she was living with her father at the time. He was running his own business and he had been awarded a large contract to build a housing complex. He had taken his workers out to celebrate, and after he left the bar, he hit another car and killed someone, but he kept driving. He eventually turned himself in and he was sent to prison for vehicular manslaughter. When he was sent to prison, Jess ended up having to go live with her mother again. And she was living in Richlands, Virginia, with a man she had actually followed to Virginia because her mother did end up having two children with him. However, this man did end up leaving them soon after they got to Virginia. And after he left, things started to get very bad for Jess. Their landlord started molesting Jess at this time. The school her mother placed her in put her in classes that she had already taken. It was not challenging enough for her, so she was quite bored. And, for any, young girl, boredom can cause us to do some crazy things.
I suppose you never did anything like that, Grace.
No, of course not.
Okay, good.
I was in sports a lot when I was
There you go. Okay, good. At this time, Jess told us that, they didn't have any money really. They were on, I guess, subsistence, from the county and things of that nature. She said that she had to wear old clothes that they got at like thrift stores and that donated clothes to wear. And they had little food in the house. The utilities would be shut off frequently for non-payment. However, her mother and whatever man her mother was seeing at the time would always seem to be at a bar or getting high. And at age 12, Jess observed a lot of these things that her mother was doing and the fact that her mother was really a total mess. She began to take on more of the parent role because of what was happening with her mother and having to take care of her mother. And during this time, Jess said her mother had a lot of mental health issues and had some suicidal tendencies at this time. And there were some very dark days there when she was age 12 with her mother. She gave some examples. She said that on one occasion she had to pull her mother out of the highway when her mother was waiting to be run over by a truck to die. Another incident Jess told us about was when her mother drove the car off a small cliff after being beaten by, at that time, her significant other. And Jess didn't elaborate on who that particular person was. Jess also said there were times throughout her childhood when her mother was a typical mother figure, but said that was very rare.
Yeah, so Jess did feel more of like the adult figure. She started following her mother's very unhealthy habits, such as drinking, and she would steal cigarettes from her mom and smoke them. And around at the age of 12, she started using cocaine with a neighbor who was 2 years older than her. So when Jess was 14, the trailer that they were living in had burned down and they had to move to Virginia Beach. Jess told us by this time she was doing drugs, specifically cocaine, with the neighbor and having an intimate relationship with him. And this was the same neighbor that she was doing cocaine with that was 2 years older than her. Her mother decided to let their neighbor move in with them when they moved to Virginia Beach. And despite all of it, Jess said her mom is her biggest support, even though Jess took more care of her mom than her mom took care of her. Jess said, and I quote, just having her around gives me strength.
Now, I just got to say something here, Let's say when you were 14 and you had a boyfriend and you told your mom, hey, I want my boyfriend to move in with us. What would happen, you think?
My mom didn't even let my older sister's boyfriends sleep in the same house. My
Okay.
sisters are much older than me, and she would never.
Jess's mother was much of a mother figure here.
No,
Who would,
not at all.
and I think her mother probably at this time was, using drugs too, and well, she was obviously drinking. And I think how can a mother not know kind of things are going wrong with her daughter like that and try to be a mother figure than contribute to the problem, by having the boyfriend just move with them to Virginia Beach?
Yeah, maybe it's also just, those mother-daughter relationships that are the mom's trying to be, a best friend to the daughter instead of like a mother figure. So I think maybe she was so used to that and just kind of ignored all those signs.
Yeah, you got that right. Now, around the time that Jess was 15, she told us that she was drinking and getting high almost daily. And school was obviously not important. She was selling drugs too at this time. When she started selling drugs, she found out how easy it was to sell them and how much money you can make selling drugs. She gave one example of buying an 8 ball of cocaine. And I hope for our listeners, if you don't know what that is, look it up. 8 ball of cocaine in the morning, breaking it down into smaller amounts, and tripling her money by lunch. She would continue to do this until she had enough money to pay rent or other living expenses for herself, her siblings, because at that time I believe she still had two brothers that were staying there that had moved with the mother, to be with that man who left them, and her mother. So she definitely was probably the mother figure and earning money for them and their living expenses. And she said that she got drugs from an older man, and she didn't tell us how old, that was a DJ that she was introduced to by her good old boyfriend at the time that moved with them to Virginia Beach. And because of that, obviously she wasn't going to school, and because she said that wasn't important to her. And yes, she served time in a juvenile facility for truancy. And at age 16, she was pregnant and was told that she either had to go to school every day or take the GED exam. And if she passed the exam with a high enough score, she would be done with high school. She took the GED exam and scored high enough to be given her diploma. And then, of course, she got married at 16 to the neighbor that moved with them, the boyfriend that she had. And she was divorced just many years later, though, but only was married to him for about a year before they separated after they got married.
More into the inside of this relationship and dynamic with Jess, her husband at this time would be very abusive and he would tell her that she was worthless, she wasn't attractive. He would make her feel bad and she allowed her husband to try a lot of different sexual things with her. And she referred to this abuse he did to her as a very normal partner abuse stuff. She gave an example of the things that he would try with her, such as freezing things and then using those frozen objects to penetrate her. They would have threesomes, and her husband would bring other men in so he could watch her have sex. If she even tried to protest, he would make her feel like she was doing something wrong. he introduced her to BDSM, but it was more of an abusive experience than a pleasurable one for her. She soon learned that after they separated that he was molesting their daughter, but she did not want to elaborate any further on this topic as well.
I just don't understand that type of relationship. I know I've been married for 41 years, and if I'd even attempted anything like that, it would have been, not very well received, I can tell you
Yeah.
that. So anyway,
She's also very young at this point. She's 17 by the time she gets divorced and she's learning about all of this.
yeah, and he was
She's
2 years older. Jess's next long-term relationship started and lasted from about age 18 to 29. And this was with a lady that she referred to as her wife and now ex-wife. And they had a cordial relationship, but it started to turn after a year or so very toxic too. Jess married her. When she married her, she had two children already. Jess did, not the lady she married, from previous relationships. Jess became pregnant while they were together. She said that she became pregnant after they had separated during their marriage for a period of time, and that's how that happened. And Jess said that while she was with her wife cheated on her as well, and kept Jess dependent on her, and that her ex-wife, was an alcoholic and drug addict at the time. During their marriage, when they separated, each one would see somebody else, and that was never good for the relationship, as our listeners probably already know. And Jess, she described the whole relationship as toxic because they both cheated on one another, were alcoholics and drug addicts. And at this time, Jess was selling meth, and she was around 25 years old. At that time, she also started to sell heroin. And later in her life, and before the incident that landed her in prison, she was selling meth, heroin, ecstasy, cocaine, and fentanyl. She wanted to make a point to tell us, though, that she only used cocaine and meth. So I guess that was okay to use those two, even though she was selling all those others. And Jess used drugs until she discovered she was pregnant. However, she did tell us that on two pregnancies she used until her second trimester on a daily basis. And she also told us that during this time in her life, she had been raped as an adult on at least two occasions. And she described two of these occasions. One was when she was attending a house party in her early 20s, became very intoxicated, and she knew she was raped but couldn't remember much. But the next day, when she woke up in the hospital, hungover and sore, she realized that something had occurred to her. When you're a young lady, and this is a thing of even in college or wherever, you really have to be aware of your surroundings. To get really intoxicated, that can cause problems for you. People will take advantage of you or attempt to take advantage of you. And just a word of wise to my co-host, be careful. All right. Don't have
yeah.
to worry about me. I'm too old. Somebody look at me, they just run the other way. They think I'm the creepy one. Anyway, Jess also said that another situation was when she was actually married to her wife. She had another adult residing with her, and it just so happened to be one of her victim's brothers that was staying with them. So the victim in this case that was killed, it was his brother that was living with them at that time. And Jess was pregnant at this time, and this individual was drunk, and they were the only two in the apartment. He came into her room, thought she was sleeping, and in her words, and I quote, "I just let it happen so there would not be any problems with everyone meaning in the apartment."
It makes me really angry for her. Her relationship ended with her wife shortly after this incident, and Jess started trying to turn her life around. She later met a man who would become her fiance in rehab, and things were going really well for them up until COVID happened. Her fiance was doing really well, but he began to digress and he was sent back to prison. She still had friends that she could turn to, good friends, but I feel like a lot of people could relate that there's also those not so good friends to be surrounded by. So at this point in Jess's communication with us, she moved forward to the point where she started college. She was a 4.0 student, a president of the Honor Society. She was a very successful student. She was about to graduate from Ames Community College and had a full scholarship to the University of Northern Colorado. However, about 6 months prior to December 30th of 2021, her life drastically changed. She was engaged and had custody of three out of her four kids and shared custody with her ex-wife for one of those children. She claims that her ex-wife was very involved with the children. She was in college at University of Northern Colorado studying human services with a minor in American Sign Language. And what she wanted to do with her future was to help people that came from a similar background as her. She was doing the 12-step program at this time and said that she had been in and out of this program since 18 years old. Jess did have support from her mom, her family, her ex-wife, and her ex-wife's family, and she was 4.5 years sober at this time.
Well, it looks like she was turning her life around, but unfortunately, as we know, sometimes that, I don't know, for lack of a better way to say it, that monkey just gets back on your back and doesn't do good for you. You know what I'm saying? And that's what happened with Jess, unfortunately, as I'll tell our listeners here. She said that, and I quote, with school and kids, I allowed myself to slip and was drinking again. So here she goes. She started drinking again. And we know sometimes that doing that can be a gateway to other things. And it didn't take her long after she started drinking again till she was using meth to get high. In her own words, I went from president of the Honor Society to selling drugs again. Her life was spiraling out of control in a bad way. By October of 2021, she lost all sense of being a mother, student, or anything other than a drug dealer and addict. In her own words, and I quote, I could not stop using. Jess said about 9 or 10 days before the incident that landed her in prison, she was dating this guy who stabbed a kid in Denver with her present. They both took off and she broke up with him a couple of days later. Jess told us now her ex-boyfriend had the person she later shot and killed and a couple of that person's friends to jump her in the street in front of her apartment. When they finished, they left her lying there in the street in front of her apartment. And the reason why he did this was because he feared that she was going to tell on him for stabbing that person in Denver. She says she called the police and told them what happened, but she said they wasn't very helpful or responsive to her. So she said she started doing her own investigation by asking around if anyone knew anything about who had attacked her and who had stole her truck. According to Jess, on 28 December, which is just 2 days prior to the incident, the police notified her that they had found her truck and impounded it. And of course, we all know when they do that, you got to pay for that to get out of there. And she didn't have a lot of money, so here we go again, her truck's impounded. The people that took her truck, though, still had her keys to her apartment because it was on the key ring.
Yeah, just to make matters worse, Jess said people were breaking into her apartment and taking her personal stuff. She offered to even pay for the keys and get them back so they would stop breaking into her apartment. She found out which apartment they were staying at, and they did have her keys. On December 30th, she went to that apartment, and the person that answered her told them they didn't know anything about it. They had no clue what she was talking about. Later that evening, she got a message that they would end up returning her keys for an ounce of meth. Instead of going to the apartment with the meth, she and a few friends decided to go to a local bar. She told us that she was very depressed because it was one of her children's birthdays this day. She drank and was very intoxicated, and eventually they all left the bar to go back home.
Yeah, that's what I would do. Instead of going and trying to get my keys back, of course, I don't think I would have the ounce of meth, but if I did, I think I'd rather go to that apartment stone sober, if you will, or whatever, to get my keys back and exchange the meth for it. I don't think I'd decide to go to a local bar and start drinking because we all know what happens when you start
Yeah, that
drinking.
shit's just not
And
gonna
I,
end very well.
and you got meth.
Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, she said after she got done drinking, she called for a ride, and just so happened the person that picked her up was the guy that she sold drugs to. So he was a customer. And to top that off, he was driving a stolen vehicle. So Jess told us once they got to her apartment complex, she and her friend that drove her home that was with had the stolen vehicle and the other person that was in the car, they all decided to get out and were walking to her apartment when they walked past the door to the apartment where she had went to earlier that day to try to get her keys and were told that they didn't know what she was talking about. So of course the guys there had been drinking. So naturally, what did they do? They got that testosterone going, I guess, and they stopped and knocked on the door and whistled for Jess to come back to the door where they were at. When the door opened, the lady was asked, "Hey, is the people here that wanted the meth for the keys?" So the lady shut the door, and then when the door opened again, one of the victims, Henry, he was the actual murder victim here, and Reuben, which was a victim that survived that was shot, in the arm, came running to the open door, but allegedly not outside the door. And I want the listeners to remember this is in the story of Jess in her correspondence to us. And she says that while they were running to the door to possibly close it, Henry had a gun and produced it and started firing the gun. She said that at that point in time, after he fired the gun, he got to the door, he slammed the door. Alleges at this time she didn't realize what was happening because it happened so fast. She thought about her kids and the fact she might die. So she says she pulled her gun out as he was running towards her, and as he shut the door, she fired her gun through the door, subsequently hitting Henry. And when it exited him, it hit Reuben, the other person in the arm that was running to the door. Jess told us two people from the apartment then apparently opened the door, grabbed Henry's gun that was laying somewhere around there, and the drugs that she had dropped on the outside the door whenever all this was occurring, and they ran out the back of the apartment. And she alleges that there were witnesses to that effect, and that was noted in her trial. She decided to go to Denver to prevent from being arrested. So she went from Greeley to Denver, which people may not know, but that's probably about a 45-minute drive one way. And according to Jess, it was hours later that she found out through people texting her that someone had been killed and the other person had been injured.
Do you know if any of these other people got arrested?
No,
Hmm.
I'm sorry. I couldn't get the report. They were being real difficult in producing any type of reports on this when I contacted them to obtain any.
I wonder what happened to them.
Maybe that's another episode.
Yeah, maybe we could do more research on that one. However, a jury did not believe Jess about her recollection of any of the events that night at the apartment. She was found guilty and sentenced to life without parole. During our correspondence, Jess admitted that she did have impulse control issues. She admitted to being very sensitive, so when people would do hurtful or harmful stuff towards her, she would say mean things and, do harmful things back. She told us that she likes to fight for fun when she's on drugs, but she knows violence is not the answer. When she gets angry, she yells, she throws things, she breaks stuff. She admitted that when she was selling drugs and getting high, she would fight when she needed to. She told us that she got taken advantage of in so many ways in her life that it made her, very jumpy and scared. However, she also was very socially awkward, she said. She does not read social cues the way that most people would. And with the trauma experience, she was probably suffering from PTSD before this event took place.
Yeah, and I think that's a key there too. I say a key, but I think that she was probably suffering from PTSD. She had a lot of these things occur in her life. And just one of the things that I want to point out is tell the listeners here about some of the symptoms of PTSD in particular. Hyperarousal is one. PTSD can cause a state of heightened arousal, making individuals more sensitive to triggers and more likely to react with anger. And of course, we already know that she was jumpy and scared. That's just another way. And I've heard this from many people who have suffered from PTSD that, they are jumpy or scared and hyper aroused all the time. Re-experiencing the trauma, flashbacks, nightmares, and intrusive thoughts can bring the traumatic event back to the forefront, triggering anger. She had been abused a lot. She had been involved in a lot of criminal activity, which she had been beaten up a couple of days prior to this incident. And now allegedly, according to her story, two people are running at her firing a gun. Okay. That may have caused her to react differently from re-experiencing trauma of her past. And then one common symptom of PTSD is anger outburst, which can be intense, unpredictable, and disruptive. And after Jess was incarcerated, she did go through psychological testing and she was actually diagnosed with PTSD, bipolar disorder, and schizophrenia. Jess told us that she is now 36 years old and has been in jail or prison since 13 January 2022.
I mean, you also can't really blame her with everybody in her personal life kind of, went against her and she got
Absolutely.
shot at. So it was, I think, a very valid response to kind of shoot back, but I also don't know the gun laws there, so I can't really back that up.
Yeah, we have seen in other research, at least I have, and I think maybe you have too, Grace, that most people who get involved in this type of violent behavior, when you look at their past, they have a very similar past to what Jess had. A
Yeah,
lot of traumas
a lot of
and stuff
childhood
like
issues.
exactly,
Yep.
exactly.
Yep. We did ask Jess what her standard day-to-day schedule is. She said that her daily routine is very bland. Monday through Friday, she goes to work at 6:45 a.m. until 2:25 p.m. She'll come back to her cell area where she'll shower, and then it's lockdown from 3 p.m. until about 4:30. During this time, she likes to sit at her window and she'll talk to her fiance until it's time to eat. And usually they eat dinner around 5:30 to 6:15 p.m. and then she'll go back to her cell until she's locked down again at 8:30 p.m. While she's waiting for lockdown, she usually talks with her fiance again, and on occasion they'll sometimes go in and watch a movie or something on TV. Usually on Friday nights, if the gym is open, they go for 2 hours and play cribbage. On Saturdays, she gets up at 6 a.m. for breakfast, and afterwards, she meets with her CrossFit team at the gym at 8 and they work out for a few hours. Then she has to go back to her cell area at 10 for a count. She calls two of her children normally during this time, and then around 12:30 it's lunch and then back at cell sitting at her window until about 3:30 p.m. for another count. And usually it's the same evening activities until lockdown at 8:30 p.m. again. Sundays are usually the same in the mornings, but she meets with her sponsors around 12 and then they go to AA meetings at 1 p.m. She's very active in the church prison program, or was, and also the Women of Influence program at her prison, but she was eventually suspended from those privileges about 2 months prior. When we did ask her what she did to be suspended, she did tell us that she was caught having sex with her current fiance inside prison.
What about that schedule? Man, isn't that something?
Yeah, I couldn't do it.
And the
I mean,
reason,
it seems like she's very active though.
yes, and I
She
really
does a
wanted,
lot.
yeah, and I wanted the listeners to hear this because this is actually a person in prison right now doing life without parole, and she's telling us, what her day is like. Okay. And I got to tell you, I don't know if I would do well in that environment, me personally. It sounds, however, I did spend time in the military, so it's kind of like being in the military, but we could still go places. I could run away from the military. I wasn't in a prison, okay? Even though it seemed like it at times, but I wasn't.
Yeah.
But I could still see the outdoors and go out anyway and not be locked down and have count and stuff like
Well,
that.
you guys would have count, right?
Yeah, but normally it was only during the first couple of weeks when people were more apt to run away from the training
Oh
than
yeah,
than
yeah, I'm
later.
sure.
But yeah, and then it kind of got down to where it's only a count maybe once a day. And
Yeah.
we also talked about prison life and how the inmates interact with one another, because I think it's important for not only students, but for people to understand how female prisons may be different from what you read about from male institutions. Okay. So here's what Jess said. And the first thing here, I'll quote what she said. I have a family in prison. I have two little kids that call me mom, and I did county jail time with them. So I wanted to explain here. She was in Weld County Jail, which is here in Colorado, and that's where they kept her until her trial. After her trial and her sentence was given, then she went back to county jail for about 30 to 60 days while they were getting her ready to transport her to the female facility, a state prison facility where she's at now. And she'll spend the rest of her time there. And also, she said that, and I quote, my favorite, meaning her little jail kid, just got here recently. She has life without parole and she's only 23. Now, Jess has a mom in prison there too, not the biological, but a person she calls mom. And she says that this person is a total firecracker. She is an African American woman, and that person has been inside the prison at this location for over 30 years. We didn't talk about what that person did to earn her that sentence. Jess said, and I quote, I have a few transgender brothers that adopted me too. Okay. Jess told us that she has a prison aunt, again, not biological, that adopted her too. When I asked her about gangs in the female prison, here was her response. She said there are no gangs in female prison where I'm at. She said, where I'm incarcerated, and I quote, it's a trap house full of pretty women who are broken and lost. However, Jess did say that when the moms tell their kids what to do, the kids usually follow suit. Now, while I'm just pointing this out, I think this is just another way for the female inmates to run the prison, just like the male inmates do, but they have different terms for everything. And this kind of fits without being chauvinistic, kind of the female population or how they would reflect one to one another. It's a family,
Mhm.
whereas in the male institution, it's a gang.
Yeah.
Okay.
Especially her being so young too there. There's
Yep.
probably a lot of older women there too, and it's
And they run it. Oh, make no
oh yeah.
mistake about it.
Do you know if she's also getting any treatment for her bipolar, or did she talk about that at all, or she kind of just left it at her diagnosis?
She just left it at her diagnosis. And I'm going to make a statement here without knowing, so I just want to make sure everybody understands that she is probably being given medications for the bipolar disorder
Right,
and maybe for the schizophrenia, but she's probably receiving no treatment by a
right.
psychiatrist for that because you have to meet certain criteria, and one of the criteria is you have to be potentially released back into society at some point in time, and they
Mhm.
want to make sure that you get to treatment so when you're released, you're not a threat to society. She's
Exactly.
got
Yeah.
life without parole, so they're not probably going to waste time on her
Yeah,
other than
yeah.
the medications.
hmm I know, learned a little bit about it in class. With medication, it's kind of like their main priority. Just a lot of funding doesn't go into treatment and counseling, so if they have the medication, that's going to be their main priority for a lot of inmates.
Exactly.
It's kind of unfortunate.
Hmm.
In this episode, we talked about Jess, but we do not want to overshadow any of her victims. We tried to interview the lead detective who initially agreed, but we never responded when he was available for it. We had no luck with interviewing the district attorney or with the victims' relatives. We could not find any information on Ruben Moreno. He was the victim that survived the shooting. We did obtain the following information about the murder victim from his legacy.com obituary. Henry Hank O. Sandoval was 36 years old. He was born in Greeley on September 29th, 1985. He had four children, Desaya, Shayla, Sonny, and Manny. Henry was an artist and did drawings to make it through life. He loved cooking as pastas were his favorite dishes to cook. Before he was killed, he was obtaining his diesel mechanic certification, and he loved listening to music and sharing his favorite songs with his family and friends. Henry loved his children and family very much as he cherished the memories with them so much. He was a very kind spirit and cared very deeply about the people around him. Henry was always laughing and joking, and he was always the life of the party. He accepted anyone for who they were and will be missed and never forgotten by everyone that loved him.
And that is the story of Jess. And it is kind of a sad story,
It
but
is.
also I want to make sure that people have endured what she has endured and did not do what she did. So, can we say that what happened to her caused her on this occasion to do what she did? I don't know if we can make that leap. I just think we can say that there's a lot of factors in her life that put her down a path that this was the result. What do
Yeah, I
you
think
think
she
there,
just
Grace?
kept getting pushed down, and it just seemed like there was no actual support in her life whatsoever.
Right.
I think she found, from what this sounds like, she found closer relationships in prison than she had on the outside.
Yes, I think so. I don't know if you can say one can thrive in jail or prison, but maybe that's her place now.
Yeah.
And maybe she'll make the best of it. Criminology Chats is brought to you by the Chicago School. For more information about the institution, please visit www.thechicagoschool.edu. That's www.chicagoschol.edu. I would like to extend my gratitude to the students who always participate in these episodes. We want to hear from our listeners, so please email us at criminologychatspodcast@gmail.com. That's CRIMINOLOGYCASPODCAST at gmail.com. And also, please check out our YouTube channel at https://www.youtube.com/@ Criminology Chats Podcast. This podcast is produced and edited by A.M. Peters with additional post-production services provided by Audio Photo Synthesis. I'd like to make a special point here to say that without her, none of these episodes would be possible. So I really put a good shout out and thank Amy very much for what she does for our podcast. I'm J.R. Ringbolt, and I eagerly anticipate you listening to our next episode. Be safe out there.
Views and perspectives shared in these recordings are intended solely for informational purposes and do not reflect the official stance or policies of the speakers of the Chicago School. Any commercial products and manufacturers mentioned are included for informational reasons only and do not imply endorsement or approval by the speakers of the Chicago School.